The history of the Punch and Judy show. Punch and Judy is a traditional British puppet show featuring Mr. Punch and his wife, Judy. The performance consists of a sequence of short scenes, each depicting an interaction between two characters, most typically Mr. Punch and one other character, who usually falls victim to Punch's stick. The show is performed by a single puppeteer inside the booth, known since Victorian times as a professor or a Punch and Judy man, and is sometimes assisted by a bottler who corrals the audience outside the booth, introduces the performance, and collects the money, the bottle. The bottler might also play accompanying music or sound effects on a drum or guitar, and engage in backchat with the puppets, sometimes repeating lines that might have been difficult for the audience to understand. In Victorian times, the drum and panpipes were the instruments of choice. Today, most professors work solo since the need for a bottler became less important when street performing with the shows gave way to paid engagements at private parties or public events. In modern shows, the audience is encouraged to participate, calling out to the characters on the stage to warn them of danger or clue them into what's going on behind their backs. The Punch and Judy show has its roots in the 16th century Italian commedia dell'arte. The figure of Punch is derived from the Neapolitan stock character of Pulcinella, which was anglicised to Punchinello. He is a variation on the same themes as the Lord of Misrule and as the many trickster figures found in mythologies across the world. Punch's wife was originally called Joan, but then it became Judy. There's a plaque commemorating the first recorded performance of Punch and Judy at St. Paul's in Covent Garden. This was discovered by the historian and writer George Speight, who discovered that the figure, who later became Mr. Punch, made his first recorded appearance in England on the 9th of May 1662, which is traditionally Punch's UK birthday. This was recorded by the diarist Samuel Pepys, who observed a marionette show featuring early versions of the Punch character in Covent Garden, London. It was performed by Italian showman Pietro Gimondo, aka Signor Bologna. Pepys described the event in his diary as an Italian puppet play that is within the rails there, which is very pretty. Punch and Judy began to emerge during the Restoration period, beginning in 1660, a period during which the art and theatre thrived. King Charles II took to the throne in 1660 and replaced the Puritan leaders Oliver Cromwell and Richard Cromwell, and theatre culture began to change. Cromwell strictly adhered to the Puritan belief that theatre was immoral and should be banned, resulting in their closure in 1642, Charles II's ascension to the throne and the interregnum, and ushered in a more tolerant period of art and culture. In the British Punch and Judy show, Punch speaks in a distinctive squawking voice produced by an instrument known as a swazzle, which the professor holds on the back of the tongue against the roof of the mouth and speaks through, acting as a second set of vocal cords. This gives Punch a loud quality which could be overheard against the noise of the streets or at the fairs where he was performing. So important is Punch's signature voice that the sound of it is a matter of controversy within the Punch and Judy circles as to whether a non-swazzled show can be truly considered a proper Punch and Judy show. Other characters do not use the swazzle, so the Punch and Judy man has to switch back and forth while still holding the device in his mouth. Punch and Judy shows were originally marionette shows or string puppets when they were brought over from Italy, but were later reinvented as the glove puppet style so that the show could be performed by one performer, and the puppets could pick up and hold props like the slapstick. Glove puppets are operated by placing the thumb in one arm, the other fingers in the other arm, and the index finger in the head. In the early 18th century, the puppet theatre starring Punch was at its height, with showmen attracting sizable crowds at his booth and Punch's theatre in Covent Garden. Punch was extremely popular in Paris as Polichinelle, and by the end of the 18th century he was also playing in Britain's American colonies, where George Washington bought tickets for a show. Marionette productions were expensive and cumbersome to mount and transport, presented in empty halls, the back of rooms of taverns, or within large tents. England's yearly agricultural events such as Bartholomew Fair and the Mayfairs, for example. In the latter half of the 18th century, marionette companies began to give way to glove puppet shows, performed from within a narrow, lightweight booth by one puppeteer, usually with an assistant or bottler to gather a crowd and collect the money. These shows might travel through country towns or move from corner to corner along busy London streets, giving many performances in a single day. The character of Punch adapted to the new format, going from a stringed comedian who might say outrageous things to a glove puppet who could do outrageous and often violent things to the other characters. The mobile puppet booth of the late 18th and early 19th century, Punch and Judy glove puppet show could easily be fitted up and was originally covered in checked bed ticking, whatever kind of inexpensive cloth they might be able to come to hand. Later Victorian booths were gaudier affairs, particularly those used for Christmas parties and other indoor performances. In the 20th century, however, red and white striped puppet booths became iconic features of the beaches and many English seaside and summer holiday resorts. Such as striped cloth is a common covering for today's puppet theatres. A more substantial change came over time to the show's target audience. The show was originally intended for adults, but it changed into primarily a children's entertainment by the late Victorian era. The story changes, but some phrases remain the same for decades or even centuries. For example, Punch dispatches his foes still, each one in turn, and uses his famous catchphrase, "That's the way to do it." The term "pleased as Punch" is derived from Punch and Judy, specifically Punch's characteristic sense of gleeful self-satisfaction. Modern British performances of Punch and Judy are no longer exclusively traditional seaside children's entertainments, which they had become. They can now be seen at carnivals, festivals, birthday parties, and other celebratory events. The association of Punch with the seaside is still very strong. At the beach each summer, seaside favourites are on show, including donkey rides, deck chairs, Punch and Judy shows, and fish and chips. The characters in a Punch and Judy show are not fixed. At the discretion of the performer, new characters can be added and old ones dropped as the traditions or fashions change. Along with Punch and Judy, the cast of characters usually includes their baby, a hungry crocodile, a clown, an officious policeman, and a prop of string sausages. The devil and the generic hangman Jack Ketch may still make their appearances, but if so, Punch will usually get the better of them. Other characters included boxers, Chinese plate spinners, topical figures, or even a monkey. A live Toby dog was once a regular featured novelty routine, sitting on the playboard and performing with the puppets. Punch wears a brightly coloured Traditionally red jester's motley and a hat with tassels or bells. He's a hunchback whose hook nose meets his curved jutting chin. He carries a stick called a slapstick, as large as himself, which he freely uses upon most of the other characters in the show. Judy wears an apron, a dress, and a bonnet, and always tries to tell Punch off for mistreating the baby. Traditionally, Punch mishandles the baby. Punch and Judy quarrel, and a fight, and a policeman comes, and Punch gets him with the stick. Punch has a gleeful run with a variety of other characters, and he usually faces them all off with his stick. And it usually ends with a hangman, devil, crocodile, or ghost. The drama developed as a succession of incidents, and much of the show is improvised, depending on the whims of the performer. In 1828, the critic, John Payne Collier, published a Punch and Judy script under the title The Tragical Comedy or Comical Tragedy of Punch and Judy. The script was illustrated by well-known caricaturist George Cruikshank. Collier said his script was based on the version performed by Professor Giovanni Piccini in the early 19th century, and Piccini himself had begun performing in London on the streets in the late 18th century. Collier's later career as a literary forger has cast some doubts on the authenticity of the script, which is rather literary style and may have been tidied up from the rough-and-tumble street theatre original. This is the earliest surviving script of a Victorian performance, but its accuracy is questioned. The performance was stopped frequently to allow Collier and Cruikshank to write and sketch, and in the words of George Cruikshank, Collier is someone of whom the full list of his forgeries has not yet been reckoned, and the myths he propagated are still being repeated. His Punch and Judy is warmly welcomed as the first history of puppets in England, but is also sadly examined as the first experiment of a literary criminal. The story of Punch and Judy varies from puppeteer to puppeteer, as previously with Punchinello and Joan, but it's changed over time nonetheless. The skeleton outline is often still recognizable. It typically involves Punch behaving outrageously, struggling with his wife and the baby, and then triumphing in a series of encounters with the forces of the law and order, and often supernatural, interspersed with jokes and songs. Typical 21st century performances of the show, performed currently in the UK, will start with the arrival of Punch, followed by the introduction of Judy. They may well kiss and dance before Judy requests Mr. Punch to look after the baby. Punch will fail to carry out this task appropriately. He may well sit on the baby in an attempt to babysit, or drop it, or even let it go through the sausage machine. Judy often returns outraged, fetches a stick, and the knockabout comedy commences. A policeman, in response to the mayhem, and himself is knocked out by Punch's stick. All this is carried out at breakneck farcical speed, with much involvement from the gleefully shouting audience. Joey the Clown, based on Joseph Grimaldi, a Georgian pantomime superstar and the original clown as we know it, appears and suggests it's dinner time. This leads to the production of a string of sausages, which Mr. Punch must look after, although the audience knows that this signals the arrival of the crocodile, whom Mr. Punch does not see until the audience shouts out and lets him know. Punch's subsequent comic struggle with the crocodile leaves him needing a doctor, who arrives and attempts to treat Punch by walloping him with a stick. But of course Punch turns on him. Punch then pauses to count his victims by laying the puppets on stage, only for Joey the Clown to move them about behind his back in the famous body counting routine. A ghost then appears and frightens Mr. Punch before he is chased off with the stick. A hangman would arrive to punish Mr. Punch, only to be himself tricked into sticking his own head in the noose. Do you do the hanging? Is a question often asked of performers. Finally, the show will often end with the devil arriving for Mr. Punch, and possibly threatening the audience as well. Punch, in his final gleeful, triumphant moment, will win his fight with the devil, bring the show to a rousing conclusion, and earn a round of applause. The Punch and Judy show does not follow a fixed storyline, but is made up of encounters or routines which are used by performers to construct their versions of the Punch and Judy show. A visit to the Punch and Judy festival at Punch's birthplace in Covent Garden will reveal a whole variety of changes rung by puppeteers from this basic material. Scripts have been published at different times since the early 19th century, but none can be claimed as the definitive traditional script of Punch and Judy. Each printed script reflects the era in which it is performed and the circumstances under which it was printed. The various episodes of the show are performed in the spirit of outrageous comedy, often provoking shocked laughter, and are dominated by the anarchic clowning of Mr. Punch. Just as the Victorian version of the show drew on the morality of its day, so also the Punch and Judy College of Professors considers that the 20th and 21st century versions of the tale are used as a vehicle for grotesque visual comedy and a sideways look at contemporary society. Charles Dickens wrote in a letter to Mary Tyler on the 6th of November 1849, "In my opinion, the street punch is one of those extravagant reliefs from the realities of life which loses its hold upon the people if it were made moral and made instructive. I regard it as harmless in its influence and as an outrageous joke that no one in existence would think of as an incentive to any kind of action, as a model of any kind of conduct. It is possible, I think, that one secret source of pleasure, very generally derived from this performance, is the satisfaction that the spectator feels in the circumstance that the likeness of men and women can be so knocked about without pain or suffering." Good one, Charles Dickens. Punch and Judy performances in the UK and other English-speaking countries can now be seen in England, Wales, Ireland, and also Canada, United States, the Caribbean, Puerto Rico, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and lots of other places. In 2001, the characters were honoured in the UK with a set of British commemorative postage stamps issued by the Royal Mail. These puppets were carved, dressed and painted by the prolific Punch and Judy Professor Brian Clark of Lowestoft and his wife Dorothy. In 2006, UK poll on the public voted Punch and Judy onto the list of icons of England. Despite Punch's unapologetic murders throughout the performance, it is still a comedy. Punch is primarily an oral tradition adapted by a succession of live performances rather than authentic scripts, and is in constant evolution. There we go. I hope you enjoyed.